A millionaire CEO who hadn't allowed a woman to touch him in 20 years. One new assistant who changed everything without trying to. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The hallways of Smith Enterprises carried a particular charge that morning. Not the productive tension of a company hitting its stride, but the subtler, more complicated energy of people who know something that someone else doesn't. Voices dropped as employees passed each other. Glances were exchanged over the rims of coffee cups. The kind of atmosphere that exists in places where a piece of significant information is moving through the population one person at a time. Have you heard? An administrative assistant murmured to a colleague near the water cooler. About the new hire? Yes. The colleague lowered her voice further. Does she know about the rule? I doubt it. Then this morning is going to be very interesting. The rule, for those who had been at Smith Enterprises long enough to have absorbed it into the background of their working lives, was both simple and absolute. Henry Smith did not touch women. Not a handshake at the conclusion of a negotiation, not an incidental brush in the elevator, not even the accidental contact that proximity in a professional environment inevitably produces for most people. Over the years, the female employees had accommodated this with the resigned adaptability of people who have learned to work around a fixed obstacle. Some attributed it to the particular eccentricity that accumulates in people who have had too much money for too long. Others had developed theories that range from plausible to elaborate. What everyone agreed on was this. You gave Henry Smith his space, and things proceeded smoothly. Sophia Morris, newly hired personal assistant and entirely unaware of any of this, arrived for her first day carrying a coffee, a notebook, and the reasonable expectation that the most significant challenge of the morning would be learning where things were kept. She noticed the atmosphere immediately. The looks people gave her had a quality she couldn't quite categorize. Not unfriendly, exactly, but layered. The specific expression of people watching something they already know the outcome of. Morris, Emma, the executive secretary, materialized at her elbow with the focused urgency of someone managing a small emergency. Mr. Smith needs a tie. The dressing room is down the hall. Get one and bring it to him directly. He has a meeting in 10 minutes. Sophia blinked. Tia. Yes. Now. Please. Just a tie. Sophia thought, already moving. How complicated can a tie be? The answer, she discovered upon opening the cabinet in the executive dressing room, was extremely, when there are approximately 50 of them arranged with the organizational fervor of someone who takes fabric accessories with unusual seriousness. Every shade, every pattern, every possible iteration of what a tie could be. Sophia stood in front of them with the specific paralysis of too many equivalent options. What color would a cold, untouchable CEO were to project maximum authority on a Tuesday? She murmured to herself, cycling through navy, then black, then charcoal. She panicked slightly. She grabbed several, then several more. Then, reasoning that the problem of too much choice was best solved by eliminating choice entirely, she gathered the whole arm's worth and marched toward the CEO's office. She knocked. Come in. She pushed the door open and found Henry Smith standing beside his desk, adjusting his cuffs with the practiced efficiency of a man who has been managing his own presentation for decades and has optimized the process to its minimum. He looked up. His expression, which had the resting quality of someone who woke each morning already slightly disappointed by what the day would offer, sharpened by 1 degree. What is that? Ties, Sophia said. All of them. I didn't know which color you preferred, and there wasn't time to ask, so I took a representative sample. She advanced to the desk and deposited the collection on its surface. Pick one. Henry looked at the pile of ties with the expression of a man absorbing an affront to his personal order, then at Sophia, then back at the pile. He exhaled in the long, measured way of someone rationing patience. Give me one. Sophia reached in and pulled one at random, extended it toward him. Henry's eyebrow went up. On the tie, rendered in cheerful repetition against the yellow ground, were small rubber ducks. Oh, Sophia took it back. Not that one. She reached in again and came out with a clean navy blue. Here. He took it with the brief nod of a man who has decided to accept the situation and move forward. Sophia stepped back, watching him begin the process of tying it, and experienced an immediate and entirely involuntary professional crisis. He was doing it wrong. Not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong, in the way of someone who has perhaps been tying ties for 20 years and has never once been corrected, and who has in consequence developed a method that produces a result that is technically a knot while being aesthetically a tragedy. This is a crime against corporate presentation, Sophia thought. I cannot watch this happen. She stepped forward without quite deciding to. Wait, you're doing it wrong. Let me. And she touched him. Her fingers brushed the back of his neck as she reached for the tie. The lightest possible contact, the kind of thing that would pass entirely unregistered between most people in most circumstances. Henry froze. Not in the way of someone who has been startled. In the way of someone whose entire system has received a signal it doesn't know how to process. Every muscle in his body went rigid simultaneously. The air in the room changed texture. Sophia became aware of this and removed her hands. Oh, sorry, I was just... You touched me. Henry's voice had a quality she hadn't heard from anyone before. Not anger, not irritation, but something beneath those things. Something that sounded, underneath its controlled surface, like genuine alarm. I did. Accidentally. I was trying to fix the... You touched me. He was staring at his own neck as though she had done something permanent to it. Sophia studied him. Do you need something for it? Antiseptic? Should I call someone? Henry was breathing with the deliberate control of a man performing an inventory of his own nervous system. He checked his neck, his arm, his jaw, looking for symptoms. This doesn't make sense, he said, almost to himself. His voice had dropped in register, and the confusion in it was unperformed. Sophia tilted her head. What doesn't make sense? Are you having some kind of reaction? He looked at her. The expression on his face was one she would think about later. Not anger, not the calculated coldness she would come to recognize as his default, but something rawer than either of those. I can't be touched, he said. Not by women. There's a condition. Every time it happens, there's a reaction. Sophia looked at her own hand, then back at him. And right now? Nothing, he said. Nothing at all. And the way he said it made it sound like the most disorienting outcome possible. Like she had just casually walked through a wall he had spent 20 years building and wasn't sure the wall existed. Right, Sophia said carefully. So I'm fine? Safe? Am I allowed to stay in the room? Don't touch me again. His composure had reassembled itself, but the seams were visible. I had no intention of touching you the first time. I was trying to save you from a tie catastrophe. She crossed her arms. But I won't. I promise. Good. His eyes were still on her, with an intensity that had moved past alarm into something that looked more like examination. One day, Sophia said, moving toward the door with a businesslike air of someone who has filed this experience under unusual but manageable, I'm going to understand what just happened. Sophia. She paused at the door. Yes. Go. She went. Henry stood in the quiet that followed her exit and touched the place on his neck where her fingers had been. His heart was still elevated. His system was still processing the absence of a response that should have been there. The discomfort, the instinctive recoil, the need for distance that had activated itself reliably for 2 decades every time a woman made contact. None of it. With Sophia, none of it. He didn't understand that. And Henry Smith was a man who had built his entire professional existence on the foundation of understanding things. The gap between what should have happened and what did was not something he knew how to file correctly. It sat at the center of him, waiting, and that, he recognized, changed something. He just didn't know what yet. The office beyond his door had returned to its usual rhythm by the time Sophia reached her desk, but the quality of people's attention as she passed had shifted. She settled in her chair, set her coffee down, and spent approximately 30 seconds reviewing the morning's events before reaching the conclusion that her new employer was going to require a complete recalibration of her expectations. So you survived. Max Turner materialized beside her desk with the easy authority of someone who has watched many people navigate this particular stretch of territory. He was the head of finance, mid-30s, carrying a coffee and wearing the unhurried expression of a man who is never surprised by anything because he has already seen the complete range of what people in professional environments do to each other. First day, no visible injuries. That's better than the last 3. Sophia looked at him. What do you mean, survived? Henry Smith, Max said. He doesn't touch women. It's not a preference, not a quirk. It's been a firm rule for as long as anyone here can remember. 20 years, give or take. Women maintain a certain distance, and everyone proceeds without incident. He could have communicated this information before I walked in there and fixed his tie. Max's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. You fixed his tie. He was doing it wrong. You put your hands on him. I touched his neck for approximately 1 second. I wasn't performing surgery. Max looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has just witnessed a person accidentally step through a door that nobody else in the building has ever been able to open. Sophia, nobody touches Henry Smith. In 20 years, you're the first person to have done that and apparently still be standing and employed. He seemed more confused than anything, Sophia said, which honestly was the strangest part of the whole thing. Max absorbed this. No reaction. None that I could see. He kept checking himself like he expected one to arrive late. There was a pause. Max took a slow, thoughtful sip of his coffee. I have a feeling, he said, that your time here is going to be extremely educational. On the other side of the building, in his office, Henry was discovering that the morning's work was not going to proceed as scheduled. He stared at the document on his screen, a contract he had reviewed a dozen times before, language he could recite from memory, and found that the meaning of the words kept slipping away before he could fully grasp it. He ran a hand over his collar, checked his neck again, though he already knew what he would find. Nothing. No hedges, no chigening, no craveling discomfort. Just skin, just a trace warmth of where she had touched him, already fading. He got up and moved to the window. The city spread below him, gray and purposeful under the morning overcast, and he stood there trying to locate the solid ground of his own reasoning. He had been living inside his boundaries for so long that they had stopped feeling like restrictions and started feeling like the shape of himself. The idea that someone could walk through them this casually, without effort, without even knowing they were there, was not something he had contingency plans for. He needed to understand it. He needed data. He needed, if he was honest, to confirm that what had happened wasn't a fluke, wasn't a malfunction of his own nervous system, wasn't something that would simply resolve itself if he applied sufficient rational force to the problem. He picked up the intercom. Sophia. Yes. I need you to bring the investor meeting report to my office. Bring it directly to me. A pause. You want me to hand it to you? That's what I said. He heard the slight inflection of a person categorizing a situation, and then, I'll be right there. The moment she appeared in the doorway, Henry had to work harder than usual at his expression, because the thing he was feeling when he saw her was not the cold professional distance he generated in the presence of most people. It was attention, the specific, involuntary quality of attention you give to something you need to understand. She crossed to his desk and extended the report. He reached for it. Their fingers made contact at the edge of the folder. Brief, incidental, carrying a fraction of the duration of the earlier touch. It hit him the same way, the same current running through his nerves, the same absent alarm, the same presence of something that should not have been there. He pulled the folder too quickly. A page slipped free and fell. Both of them bent for it simultaneously. Their foreheads met with a soft, glancing impact. They were suddenly close enough to each other that Henry could see the exact shade of her eyes, and she could read the full surprise in his. Sophia pulled back first, standing up with a barely contained expression. If that was some kind of test, you passed. Excellent reflexes. Henry straightened, gathered the page, and returned to his desk with the composure of a man in active recovery. That was not a test. It had a very test-like quality. It was an accident. Sure. She crossed her arms. Are you always this tense, Mr. Smith? Or is it specifically me? I don't get tense. Something moved in her expression. Amusement, but with a layer of genuine curiosity beneath it. She raised her hand slightly, deliberately, as if to reach toward him. Henry stepped back. The movement was fast enough to be involuntary, and the chair behind him scraped the floor. The silence was complete. Then Sophia let her hand drop, and the look on her face was not triumphant. It was thoughtful. "I see," she said softly. "You're not tense. You're afraid." "That's enough," Henry said. "You can go." She went, but she was thinking, and he could tell, and that bothered him in a way he couldn't immediately categorize. The days that followed were a masterclass in professional equilibrium on both their parts, though Henry's required considerably more effort. He deployed the tools he had always deployed: precision, structure, the kind of controlled distance that most people interpreted as authority and found impressive. He kept interactions brief. He focused on the work, but the work kept revealing Sophia to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He noticed the way she talked to herself while typing, quiet and dry, as if she were narrating her own experience for an audience of one. He noticed the way she looked at him across a meeting room with the expression of someone who has already understood the situation and is waiting patiently for everyone else to catch up. He noticed, to his ongoing frustration, that she was very good at her job, not in the polished, trained way of people who had studied how to do it, but in the natural way of someone whose intelligence is simply the lens through which she processes everything, making them effortlessly useful almost as a byproduct of paying attention. He also noticed that Max Turner made her laugh, and that the laugh was real, and that something in him objected to this with a force that had no professional justification whatsoever. He found a minor error in the quarterly report, a formatting inconsistency in the second chart, the kind of small, technical mistake that would go unnoticed in most contexts. He picked up the intercom. "Sophia, my office." A pause. "Now?" "Like immediately now?" "Yes." She appeared 2 minutes later with a brisk, slightly defensive posture of someone who has already assessed the situation and knows what's coming, but intends to meet it on their own terms. "If you're going to call me in over the intercom with that tone, I need you to know that it does things to my blood pressure." Henry held up the report and pointed to the error without speaking. Sophia took it, read it, and looked back at him. "I misaligned the columns in the second chart." "Yes, I'll fix it." "Good." Though, for perspective, the misalignment of chart columns has never, to my knowledge, affected a quarterly outcome. "That's not the point." "Okay." She turned to leave. Then, over her shoulder, "Do you own a single thing that isn't structured within an inch of its life? Closet? Refrigerator? Inner life?" He hadn't meant to say anything. "I saw you talking to yourself earlier. In the hallway." She stopped, turned back slowly with the expression of someone who has been unexpectedly caught doing something they thought was private. "You heard that?" "Yes." She covered her face briefly with both hands. "This is horrifying." "Why?" "Because I try extremely hard to seem at least marginally normal, and now I narrate my own experiences to myself like a nature documentary." Henry considered her. Most people talk to themselves. It's a common cognitive behavior associated with problem solving. Sophia looked at him from between her fingers. "Are you being nice right now?" "I'm being factual." "Those are usually the same thing for you, aren't they?" She lowered her hands and studied him with the specific attention she gave to problems she found genuinely interesting. "Okay, I'll fix the chart." She left. Henry sat in the quiet aftermath of that conversation and tried to locate the version of himself that didn't find Sophia Morris's reactions genuinely engaging. He couldn't find it, and the inability bothered him considerably. The charity auction was not something Henry had chosen. It was an obligation of the category that his position generated regularly, an event he was required to appear at, to be seen at, to deploy his presence in the service of the company's reputation. The fact that it required a companion was an additional complication he generally resolved through his PA's contacts. This year, before he had thought it through, he had said Sophia's name. She stared at him from her desk with the alert expression of someone who has heard a sentence and is replaying it to confirm accuracy. "You want me to attend a charity auction with you. As a representative of the company, you'll stay at my side, engage politely when necessary, and you've spent the better part of this week creating additional distance between us, and now you'd like me to accompany you to a formal event." "Yes." "Do you hear yourself?" "I hear myself fine. Will you attend?" Sophia looked at him for a long moment, processing something. Then, "You're going to need to figure out what you want from me eventually, Mr. Smith. But yes, I'll go." She arrived at the agreed time in a deep burgundy dress that was, by any objective measure, exactly right. Elegant without being calculated, confident without trying to announce itself. Henry registered this with a composure he had to work for, and then registered the fact that he was working for it, and then registered the fact that this was happening with a frequency he needed to examine. "Is there a problem?" Sophia asked. "No, let's go." The event was the usual architecture of these evenings. Soft light over expensive surfaces, conversations that were professional relationships wearing the costume of social ones. Waitstaff moving through the room with the trained invisibility of people who have learned not to be seen. Henry worked the room the way he always did, efficiently, purposefully, with the minimum social expenditure required to serve the maximum strategic outcome. Sophia, beside him, was something different. She greeted people with a directness that wasn't performance, asked questions that were genuinely curious, and produced the specific effect that certain people produce in rooms full of powerful individuals. The effect of being the most honest person present, which makes everyone around them feel both relieved and slightly off balance. He was watching her navigate a conversation with one of the investors when the evening's particular complication arrived. A woman in a red dress, sharp-eyed and precisely assembled, cutting a path through the room with the specific intentionality of someone who has something to say and has decided now is the time to say it. Amelia Wright. Henry recognized her the moment she turned into his peripheral vision. Henry. Her voice carried the specific familiarity of someone who once had the right to use his name that way and has never fully relinquished the feeling. What a surprise. I didn't expect you to bring a companion this year. Henry kept his posture and his expression exactly where they were. Amelia. Sophia registered the name, the tension, the history compressed into those two syllables, and made a rapid assessment of the situation. She took Henry's arm with the unhurried ease of someone who has decided to contribute to a conversation she wasn't invited into and found, to her quiet surprise, that he didn't pull away. "He's wonderfully thoughtful about these things," Sophia said warmly, to no one in particular. "Absolutely insisted uno come." Amelia's attention moved to Sophia with the focused assessment of a woman performing a rapid calculation. "Is that so? And you are?" "Sophia Morris. I work with Henry." "In what capacity?" "Oh, various things." Sophia smiled with a pleasantness that was completely genuine and somehow also completely impenetrable. "We're quite a team." Amelia studied her for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. "How charming." She looked at Henry. "You've always been so guarded. It's interesting to see someone manage to get through that." "Maybe he just needed the right person," Sophia said simply. "Those things happen." The words were mild, but something in the directness of them, the complete absence of performance, the fact that Sophia clearly believed what she was saying, produced an effect on the exchange that no amount of strategic maneuvering could have achieved. Amelia smiled with her mouth, said something polished, and excused herself. Henry did not speak for a moment after she walked away. Then, that was unnecessary. She was being condescending, and you were going to let her. Sophia released his arm and straightened her dress. "You're welcome." He looked at her sideways. "You enjoyed that." "A little. Are you going to tell me who she is?" "No." "All right." She accepted this without pressing. "Then let's get back to the part where you make strategic eye contact with investors." He looked at her for a beat longer than he needed to. "You're not what I expected when I hired you." "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to understand." Sophia almost smiled. "Sorry to disappoint." "You haven't," he said, and turned back toward the room before either of them could do anything with that sentence. The drive home was quiet in the way that drives home from events like this are usually quiet, both people running the evening through their minds at different depths. Sophia watched the city through her window. Henry kept his attention on the road with the deliberateness of someone keeping it there on purpose. "Was it useful?" she asked finally. "The event?" "Yes." The company's position was well represented. "And Amelia?" She said the name carefully. "Was that useful too?" A pause. in a manner of speaking. Sophia turned to look at him. His profile in the passing light was controlled and opaque in the way it usually was, but there was something underneath it that she was beginning to be able to read. A tightness that wasn't anger. A held quality that wasn't composure. "She's someone who hurt you," Sophia said. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "Okay," she said. "You don't have to tell me about it." When they reached her building, she got out and leaned briefly against the open car door. "For what it's worth, whatever it was that happened with her, you've built something remarkable since then. The company, the reputation, everything." She looked at him steadily. "Whatever it cost you to get here, you made good use of it." Henry looked at her. "That's a generous way to see it. It's an accurate one." She straightened. "Good night, Mr. Smith." "Good night, Sophia." He watched the building door close behind her and sat with the engine running and the silence in the car for longer than was necessary. Then he drove home and spent the better part of the following 3 hours in his apartment trying to work and finding that his concentration had been permanently annexed by a specific quality of attention that had no interest in quarterly reports. The past arrived, as it usually did, without invitation. Henry was 16 years removed from the person who had believed in love with the unguarded conviction of someone who has not yet learned what it costs. He had been 32 then, young enough to be reckless about it, old enough that the damage it produced went deep and stayed. Amelia Wright had been everything he had arranged himself around at the time. The center of a future he had designed with the same meticulous care he brought to every significant project. He had told himself that she was different. He had believed it entirely. He had been, in every way that counted, completely wrong. She had left him for someone whose assets outweighed his at the time. She had done it with a directness that might, in a different context, have been almost respectable. No hesitation, no pretense, just the clean declaration that he had never been what she actually wanted. That he had been a position held until something better opened up. The phrase she had used, "You were never going to be enough," had arrived with the specific precision of a thing said by someone who knows exactly where to aim. Henry had stood in the wreckage of that and made a set of decisions that he had lived inside ever since. Distance. Structure. The rule that no woman would touch him again, because touch was what intimacy looked like before it became something that could be used against you. 20 years. The wall had been perfect for 20 years. And then Sophia Morris had walked in to deliver a tie, and the wall had simply failed to activate. The following morning, Henry arrived at the office with the specific quality of a man who has made a decision. He walked with purpose. He sat with purpose. He reviewed the morning's reports with purpose, and none of it helped, because Sophia was at her desk doing something on her computer with her lower lip caught between her teeth in the expression she wore when she was concentrating on something difficult, and his brain was apparently no longer capable of treating that as neutral information. He watched her for 3 seconds from the hallway. Then he walked over. "From this point forward," he said, in the tone of someone issuing a policy update, "I want our professional relationship kept strictly professional. No personal conversations. No unnecessary proximity." Sophia looked up. She assessed the situation with the quick, precise attention she brought to everything. "I see. And you've decided this because it's appropriate given our positions. Is it also appropriate given that you've been watching me from the hallway for the last 30 seconds? Henry kept his expression exactly where it was. "I wasn't watching you." "Henry." She used his name with the specific directness that she deployed when she was being honest and wanted him to notice it. "You look at me constantly. You called me into your office 3 times yesterday on pretext that barely qualified as work-related. And now you're standing in front of my desk telling me we should have less contact." She tilted her head. "I'm going to ask you to hear yourself." "The rule stands," he said. "Okay." She turned back to her computer with the unhurried acceptance of someone who has decided to wait for something rather than argue for it. "Then I'll be here, being completely professional, whenever you're ready to tell me what's actually going on." He stood there for a moment. He had expected resistance, had prepared for it, and the absence of it left him standing with no conversational purchase. He left, and was immediately, quietly, devastated by the fact that she stopped giving him her attention, because he had not understood until that moment how completely he had come to rely on it. The following 2 days were the longest Henry had experienced since the period of controlled grief following Amelia, and they had the same quality, the experience of having removed something important and discovering too late how structural it was. He went through the motions, meetings, decisions, the machinery of running a company that generated several $billion annually. All of it worked exactly as it was supposed to. None of it was enough. Sophia, to her credit and his increasing torment, was impeccable, professional, efficient, warm in the way she was warm with everyone and gave him no more of it than anyone else. She responded to his requests promptly and without editorial. She stopped coming to his door when there was no reason to come. She stopped the small, unnecessary conversations that had been the actual architecture of his days and which he had been too controlled to acknowledge he valued until they were gone. By Wednesday afternoon, he had made the decision. He went to her desk. She looked up. "Dinner," he said. "Tonight. There are project matters I'd like to discuss." Sophia regarded him with the level gaze of someone who has watched a person say one thing while meaning another and has decided to extend the professional courtesy of pretending to believe it. "What time?" "7. I'll be ready." The restaurant was one he had chosen with more care than the work pretext deserved. Quiet, good light, the kind of place where conversations could go somewhere without the architecture interrupting. Sophia looked at the room when they arrived, and then at him with one eyebrow slightly raised, which was the only comment she made about the gap between project matters and Camelot Restaurant. They ordered. The waiter left. Sophia rested her chin on one hand and looked at him with the patient attention of someone prepared to wait as long as necessary. "You're not going to pretend we're here for work," he said. "I never pretend anything," she said simply. "I thought you'd noticed that by now." Henry looked at his wine glass. "Tell me something about you that has nothing to do with this company." Sophia's expression shifted, not surprised exactly, but recalibrated. "That's not what I expected you to say." "I'm aware." She considered it. "My mother raised me by herself after my father left when I was 9. She worked constantly, more hours than anyone should work, and she never once made it feel like a hardship. She made it feel like dignity." Sophia looked at the table. "When I was a teenager, I used to be embarrassed by how hard she worked. Now it's the thing I admire most about anyone, the capacity to do what needs doing without requiring anyone to recognize it." She looked up. "What made you build a rule?" The question arrived with the directness she brought to everything, and he found, to his surprise, that he had no interest in deflecting it. "Someone I trusted used my attachment to her as a resource," he said, "and when a better resource presented itself, she took it." He kept his voice level. "I was 32. I thought I understood the difference between genuine connection and strategic positioning. I was wrong." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Then, Amelia." "Yes. And since then you've organized your life so that nothing like that could happen again." "Yes. And it worked. For 20 years, it worked." She picked up her wine glass. "Until a woman walked in to fix your tie and your entire system failed." "Failed is one word for it. What's another?" He looked at her across the table and said what he hadn't said to anyone in 2 decades. "I don't know. I genuinely don't know what's happening, and I don't know what to do about it. And I find that I am substantially less comfortable with that uncertainty than I expected to be." Sophia set her glass down and looked at him for a long moment with the full, steady quality of her attention. "Henry, I'm not Amelia." He held very still. "I don't want your money or your company or your position in any ranking of influential people. I never have." She met his eyes without flinching. "I want—" She paused, seeming to choose the words. "I want to know who you actually are underneath all the structure. And I think you want someone to ask." The silence between them was the kind of silence that happens after something true has been said. "This is more complicated than I know how to manage," he said. "I know. I'm not good at this." "I know that too." She almost smiled. "But you asked me to dinner. That's a start." When they left the restaurant, Henry drove her home without speaking much, but the silence was different from the strategic silences he usually deployed. It was companionable. It was the silence of two people who have said enough for one night and are sitting in the comfort of having said it. He parked in front of her building. She gathered her things and paused before opening the door. What did you do to me? The question escaped him before he had approved it, and he heard the rawness in it with something between embarrassment and relief. Sophia looked at him in the low light of the car's interior. The answer she gave was quiet and absolutely truthful. Nothing, Henry. Everything that's happening is already in you. She got out. He watched the door close behind her. He sat there for a long time, with her answer rearranging his understanding of himself, and drove home to an apartment that was too large and too quiet and too organized, and spent the night not sleeping, which was becoming a pattern he would need to address. The days that followed were the closest Henry came in 20 years to simply not knowing what to do with himself. He maintained the external architecture, the meetings, the decisions, the cold professional register that everyone except Sophia responded to as simply the way he was. But internally, he had passed some threshold he hadn't identified until he was on the other side of it, and the territory on this side was unmapped. He avoided her, deliberately, methodically, with the kind of planning he brought to problems he didn't want to underestimate. He arrived early, left late, rerouted his path through the office to minimize overlap. He delegated tasks that would have required her presence. He stayed in his office when he heard her voice in the corridor. Sophia led him. This was, if anything, worse than confrontation. She made no attempt to pin him down, created no pressurized moments, did not deploy any of the tools that people use when they're trying to force a situation to resolve itself faster than it wants to. She simply continued to be excellent at her job and entirely pleasant to everyone in the building and available when professionally necessary, and otherwise left him alone. The aloneness was unbearable. He had built his life in it, and now it was intolerable. On a Thursday evening, working late in his office with the city dark outside the windows, Henry heard a knock. He said, "Come in," and Sophia came in, and she closed the door behind her and leaned against it with the composure of someone who is prepared for this conversation and is ready for however it goes. "I need you to stop running," she said. He set down his pen. "I'm not running. Henry, I've been working. You've rerouted your entire schedule to avoid me for 11 days. That is the definition of running." She crossed her arms, and the expression on her face was not angry. It was something more honest than anger. It was tired. "If you've decided you don't want this, whatever this is, then say so. I can work with a clear answer. What I can't work with is being managed from a distance by someone who isn't sure." Henry stood up from behind his desk. He walked toward her, and she didn't move, and he stopped when he was close enough for the distance between them to mean something. "I am sure," he said. "That's the problem." Sophia looked at him. In the low light of the office, with the city spread behind him through the glass, something in her expression opened slightly. "Then stop being afraid of it." He raised his hand and touched her face, the back of his fingers against her cheek, lighter than the softest thing he could think of, and felt the shock of it moving through him with the force of something that has been held back for a very long time. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. "Held it there. I don't know how to do this," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I know," she said, "but you're doing it." He kissed her. Not impulsive, not the desperate urgency of someone giving in to something they've been fighting. Deliberate. Chosen. The kiss of someone who has finally decided to stop fighting something they've known for weeks is true. When they separated, Sophia was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not the amused challenge of their usual dynamic, not the patient steadiness she maintained when he was being difficult, but something softer than both. Something that made him understand exactly what he'd been avoiding and exactly why he'd been wrong to avoid it. "You were afraid of this," she said softly. "Yes." "Because of what happened before?" "Yes." She studied him. "Do you believe I'm going to do what she did?" Henry looked at her, really looked with the careful attention he gave to things that mattered, and told the truth. "No, that's not what I'm afraid of." "What then?" "That I'll give you every part of myself and discover I still don't know how to make it work." He exhaled. "That I've spent 20 years becoming someone who is very good at everything except this, and that when it finally matters, the skill isn't there." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she took his hand from her face and held it in both of hers, and looked at him with the directness that was the most recognizably her thing about her. "Henry, love isn't a skill. It's a decision you make every day. And the fact that you're standing here, making it tells me everything I need to know about whether you can do it. He looked at their joined hands. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's not as complicated as you've been making it either. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, stay. She smiled. The real one. Not the teasing one, not the professional one, but the version that was just Sophia. All right, she said. For a while. They stayed in his office for another 2 hours, talking in the quiet way of people who have finally stopped managing each other and started just existing in the same space. Henry discovered that Sophia, in this register, unhurried, honest, entirely herself, was both exactly what he expected from knowing her professionally and something new and deeper that the professional context had only sketched. When she left that night, Henry stood at the window and looked at the city and felt something that took him a moment to identify, because it had been absent for so long. Peace. The specific, groundless, irrational peace of someone who has finally stopped fighting something they were always going to lose. The weeks that followed were the best of Henry Smith's professional memory, which was a strange thing to realize given that his professional memory contained several significant achievements by any objective measure. But this was better, not because anything in the company had changed. It hadn't. The work remained exactly what it was and was still excellent and demanding and absorbing, but because the space around the work had changed entirely. He and Sophia developed a rhythm that no one in the office could quite categorize. Their working relationship remained exactly as functional and precise as it had always been. But there were other things now. A specific quality of exchange when he passed her desk in the morning. The way she appeared in his office around 11 with tea, uninvited, and he no longer pretended to find this intrusive. The way she argued with him about decisions that didn't involve her and was usually right, and the way he had stopped finding this irritating because she was right. She challenged him. Not strategically, not with any agenda, but in the honest way of someone who simply cannot let a bad idea pass without commenting. He had meetings where her contribution was the hinge the whole discussion turned on, and she delivered it with the casual confidence of someone who has stopped needing the contribution to be recognized. He recognized it anyway. He made a point of it. One evening over dinner at his apartment, a habit they had developed one evening a week, rotating between his place and a selection of restaurants she chose because she had stronger opinions about food than he did. She set down her glass and looked at him with a specific look that meant something honest was coming. "You're still not telling people," she said. Henry looked at her. "What do you mean? About us? About what this is?" She wasn't accusatory, just clear. "I'm in your office every day. The people we work with aren't unaware. But you've never said anything, never done anything to make it official. And it's been 6 weeks. He was quiet. "Henry, are you ashamed of this?" "No." The word came out with a force that surprised even him. "Absolutely not." "Then what?" He looked at the table. It was the old problem in its new form. The fear that if he claimed something completely, named it, made it real in front of other people, he would be handing something precious to the possibility of its loss. "I'm afraid," he said quietly, "that making it official makes it possible to lose." Sophia studied him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Henry, I'm already in your life. Officially or unofficially, that's where I am. The label doesn't change what could go wrong. What it changes is what we have while it's going right." He looked at her. "What if I can't?" "I'm not asking you to be perfect," she said. "I'm asking you to be present." He thought about that. "Then, come to the investor conference with me next Friday. As my partner, not my assistant." Sophia looked at him carefully. "Are you sure?" "Yes. Because that will require you to say something out loud to people who will have thoughts about it. I know what it requires." Something in her expression shifted, softened. "Okay," she said. "Then yes." Henry looked at her in the light of his own apartment, with her hand warm over his and the city quiet outside, and felt the specific weight of something he was choosing with his eyes open. He had been waiting 20 years to feel this with any confidence. He was not going to wait any longer. The investor conference was on the 43rd floor of one of the city's most photographed buildings, and it was full of exactly the kind of people Henry moved among daily. Serious, powerful, accustomed to having their assessments of situations confirmed. He had attended this event every year for a decade and had never felt like anything other than what it was, a professional obligation executed with professional precision. This year was different. He walked in with Sophia, and the difference was immediately legible to anyone paying attention, because Henry Smith did not usually appear at events with anyone, and the way he stood beside her communicated something that was not professional proximity. People noticed. People looked. Henry Smith did not manage their looking. He let them look and stay beside Sophia, and introduced her to James Whitmore, the lead investor, with the calm of someone who has made a decision and is not interested in managing other people's responses to it. "Sophia Morris," Henry said. "My partner." Sophia, to her credit, kept her expression entirely steady. But later, in the break between sessions, she found a quiet corner and looked at him. "You used that word deliberately." "Yes." "With James Whitmore." "Yes." "Who will have told 6 people by now." "Probably 8. He met her eyes without flinching. "I meant it." She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. Then she said, quietly, "I know you did," and turned back toward the room. But something had changed. He could see it in her posture, in the way she moved through the rest of the afternoon, lighter, as if something she had been carrying carefully could finally be set down. He understood that, because he felt it too. He had been afraid that naming it would make it vulnerable. What he had not accounted for was that naming it would make it real. And that real, even with all of real's attendant complications and risks, was infinitely better than whatever carefully controlled version he had been managing before. They left the conference together. In the car, Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then, "You said partner." "I know. In front of a room full of people who influence your professional world." "Yes." "How did that feel?" He thought about it honestly. "Easier than I expected," he said. "Because it was true, and saying true things is easier than managing the alternative." Sophia turned to look at him with the full weight of her attention. "Henry." "Yes." "I love you." The words landed with the straightforward simplicity that was the most characteristically Sophia thing about her. No preamble, no strategic calculation, just the thing itself offered directly. Henry kept his eyes on the road. The city moved past the windows. His heart was doing something complicated and completely unambiguous. "I know," he said quietly. "That's not a response. I'm working up to one. You have approximately 10 minutes before we reach my building." He was quiet for 7 of them. Then, in the tone of someone making a statement of fact, "I love you. I have for some time." I didn't know how to say it without being afraid of what it meant. Sophia didn't say anything right away. When he glanced at her, she was looking out the window with the expression of someone sitting with something good. "What does it mean?" she asked. "That you're the most important thing in my life. That the version of me that existed before you came to fix my tie was functional and successful and completely incomplete, and I had no way to see that until the comparison became available." He paused, "and that I would very much like to not do this alone anymore." The car stopped in front of her building. She turned to face him fully. "Ask me," she said. "Ask you what?" "You know what?" He did. He had known, without quite admitting it, for the last several weeks. He had a meeting that could not be interrupted. He had the ring his grandmother had left him, which he had carried in the inside pocket of his jacket for 3 days, because he kept reaching the moment and then retreating from it. He reached into his pocket. Sophia looked at the small box and then at him, and her expression was the most unguarded version of her face he had ever seen. "Sophia Morris," he said, "you walked into my life to deliver a tie, and instead you dismantled everything I'd spent 20 years building, and I find that I'm grateful for it beyond what I know how to say." He opened the box. The ring was simple, elegant, entirely right. "Will you stay?" "Permanently. As my wife." Sophia looked at the ring, then at him, then at the ring again. "Yes," she said, and then, with the specific humor she brought to everything, "though I want on record that if this marriage involves 50 ties, I am implementing a strict organizational system." He laughed, a real one, low and warm and entirely open, and slid the ring on her finger, and leaned across the car and kissed her in the light of a street lamp in front of her building while the city continued its indifferent business around them. The wedding took place in early spring, in a venue that was smaller and quieter than anyone expected for someone in Henry's position, which was entirely by Sophia's design. She had said, plainly, that she wanted a day that felt like themselves. He had agreed with no modifications, which Max Turner later described as the most comprehensive evidence of personal growth he had witnessed in a professional lifetime. The morning of the ceremony, Henry stood in the small preparation room with Max, who was there as his best man and was attempting to manage the situation with characteristic competence. Henry was, for the first time in memory, unable to locate his composure. His hands were steady, because his hands were always steady, but the rest of him was in a state that he could only describe as completely willing. "You look like a man who has made peace with something," Max observed. "I have," Henry said. "She changed you." "She didn't change me," Henry said. "She showed me who I was before I spent 20 years trying to be someone safer." He looked at his reflection. "Those things sound similar, but they're completely different." Max clapped him on the shoulder. "For what it's worth, whatever she did, the rest of us are very glad of it." The ceremony was short, personal, and full of the specific warmth of an event arranged by people who meant every detail of it. When Henry saw Sophia appear at the end of the aisle, in a dress she had chosen herself without consulting him, and which was perfectly her, he stopped breathing for a moment in the straightforward, involuntary way of someone whose system has encountered something it doesn't have the framework for. She walked toward him, and every careful, structured, deliberate thing he had built in the 20 years before this day arranged itself around the truth of this moment. That all of it had been waiting for this, that the walls and the rules and the cold professional distance had been a preparation, a terrible one, for learning what it felt like to finally be safe enough to let someone in. She reached him and looked at his face with the direct, warm attention that was the thing he loved most about her. "You look like you might cry," she said quietly, for only him. "I'm not going to cry. You're very close. I'm composed." "Henry." She took his hand. "It's okay not to be composed. That's the whole point." He held her hand and faced the officiant and said the words when they were asked for with a clarity and a certainty he had not known he was capable of feeling. "I do," 2 words. 20 years in the making. When Sophia said the same words back to him, Henry felt something unlock in his chest that had been closed for so long he had forgotten it existed. The mechanism of himself, finally restored to the configuration it was supposed to have been running in all along. The reception was everything Sophia had planned. Warm, a little chaotic, full of people who were genuinely happy and made no effort to pretend otherwise. Max gave a speech that produced laughter from people who had never met each other and made even Henry smile at himself. Sophia danced with a looseness and delight that Henry spent most of the evening simply watching, because this was something he could do now, stand in a room and watch someone he loved and feel nothing except grateful. When she pulled him onto the dance floor, he went without argument. "You're not resisting," she observed. "I decided to stop doing that." "In general, or specifically about dancing?" "Both." She smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder, and they moved through the music with the comfortable imprecision of 2 people who are not thinking about the dancing. Late in the evening, they found a quiet corner of the garden outside the venue, the noise of the party reaching them softly through the glass. The stars were indistinct above the city light, but the air was mild and still, and Henry had Sophia's hand in his. "Are you happy?" she asked. He considered the question the way he considered everything, carefully, with real attention, with the intention of giving an accurate answer. "I didn't know what this felt like before," he said. "I thought I had a reasonable approximation of contentment, and I mistook that for the best available outcome. And now I understand the difference." She pressed his hand. 20 years is a long time to wait for something." "Yes." He looked at her. "Worth it." She laughed, quietly, in the dark garden, and Henry Smith, who had spent 20 years building walls because a single person convinced him the alternative was too costly, stood in the middle of his own happiness and found that it was, without qualification, enough. More than enough. Exactly enough. What did you think of Henry and Sophia's story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. From 0 to 10, what score would you give it? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And check out more emotional stories right here on the final screen.